Well, I am excited to share this message series with you all. I realized a minute ago, I forgot to mention why I didn't start this last week. For those of you that actually came last Sunday expecting to hear from me, you know that I didn't come. My family was battling the flu. All of us, right out of Christmas, ended up just sick, and it was dominoes. All six of us ended up that way. And so I wanted to be here with you all so bad. I wanted to begin this message series then, but I couldn't. So good news for all of you that forgot. You got Port 1 today. You didn't miss anything. And I'm excited to share it with you. We're going to dig into kind of an ancient story to talk about a way that we might change a pattern of behavior in our lives to move in a new direction. It's not lost on me that in culture we have a lot of resources for bettering ourselves, or a lot of resources for moving in a positive direction, but there's not a lot of stuff available for those of us that need a turnaround. That we find ourselves kind of in rock bottom and we don't really know how to change this spiral, right, and get it moving in the right direction. And we just get stuck. We get stuck in those places. This thought kind of occurred to me several years ago. I found myself as the leader of an organization that was crumbling. We were just about 8 months away from being completely bankrupt. We were jettisoning in people and jettisoning in money, and nothing was going right. I was a young, you guys know that I was probably a pastor at this point. It was a church that was in need of a desperate turnaround. And I was a young kid, I was like 6 months away from graduating from seminary. And so I had this idea the reason this place is such a mess is because they didn't have me yet. And so thank God I'm here for them. At about 8 months into being the leader of that organization, when I had exhausted everything that I knew and nothing had gotten any better, nothing had changed, I realized I didn't know anything. And I began kind of searching, what is it going to take to kind of turn this around? What can we do to move this in a new direction? And there just wasn't anything. And I remember I called a friend of mine, a far more successful friend, and he's the kind of guy that buys businesses that are in problems financially, and then flips them around and gets them making money, and then sells them. He flips businesses for a living. And so I called him and I was like, "Hey, listen, Tim, I got to know something. I'm in this bind and I'm leading this organization, and here's where I'm at. What do you do? What's your secret? How do you turn something around when it seems like the spiral is completely out of control? How do you flip something, change the culture, get it moving in the right direction? What do you do?" And he says, "Well, listen, I don't know if this really applies to the church, but what I do is, I find a business that has a really great product, but they just, they're financially struggling, right? And usually by the time I come in, they're struggling financially, so I just let it go bankrupt. And then once it's bankrupt, I recapitalize it, and I restaff it, and I flip it around, and then pretty soon we're making money." And then he just pauses, and I'm like, that's the most unhelpful thing I have ever heard in my entire life. That doesn't apply to the church at all, right? And like me specifically in my life, I can't imagine saying, "Well, you know what? I'll just hang around and wait. I'll just wait until rock bottom can't be any closer, right? And then everything will be fine." I mean, I said, "Dude, this is pointless." And he looked at me and goes, "Yeah, I know. You got a tough job. Good luck." And that was the end of the conversation. And it just dawned on me, there's just not a ton of literature or information that's out there that talks about that very fact. And look, here's the thing. You could find yourself in a place like this in your business, but it's far more likely and far more common that we find ourselves in this place in our own personal lives. It could be your marriage, right? Your marriage is spiraling out of control, and it is heading towards the drain, heading towards the bottom, and you're like, this isn't where either one of us want to be, but I don't know how to turn this thing around. Or it could be your own, it could be substance abuse. I met so many people and so many lives that have been just crushed because they find themselves in a spiral, and they can't seem to shut it off. They can't seem to turn it off. They can't seem to switch in a new direction. And there's not any common, easy pathway for leading and navigating a turnaround. Or it could be in your own personal finances. You find yourself spending money like water, or in debt up to your eyeballs, and you're like, "I don't want to feel this way, and I don't want to have this, but here I'm at, and I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do." It could be a relationship with your kids. It could be anything, a relationship with your friends, lots of different areas where you find yourself spiraling. You know that feeling? You're spiraling, and you just don't know how to flip it. How do I get this momentum that's moving in this direction to now move in a new direction? What does it take? And so a couple of years ago, I discovered that there's an ancient text, an ancient book it's not really a book, it's a story, it's one of our prophets, but it's in our Bible. It's an ancient story in our Bible that actually is just rich with knowledge on how to lead a turnaround. And I want to share it with you over these next couple weeks. And what we're going to try to do is take this kind of ancient story and mine out some truth about the way God built us, about the way our lives work, about the way He leads us, and just see if there's a way that we can kind of come up with a pathway towards turnaround. And so the book we're going to talk about is actually a picture of this guy. You guys, anybody following me who know who this is? Yeah, it's Jonah, right? I'm sorry if this offends your VeggieTales version of the Jonah story, which is the one that I grew up with. Let me just tell you, when I got to seminary, I had one of the best Old Testament professors on the planet. I think that's why I love the Old Testament so much. And she just made me just discover a whole new thing about the Old Testament and the stories. And this was one of them where I was like, I think I got robbed by only knowing the VeggieTales version of this story. That there's a human element to this, that there's something that is rich and just full when we understand that this is an event with people in it. Now, I know for those of you that are Bible nerds, okay, so if it's not you, just ignore me for the next 10 seconds. But for those of you that are Bible nerds, you might know that this is one of those stories that exists in our scripture where there's kind of some debate. Is this a parable like the way Jesus talked? Like, did this actually happen, or is it a parable? Were these actual events that occurred, or was someone telling the story? To me, honestly, I feel like that's sideways energy. Regardless, the Holy Spirit thought best to put this and include this in Scripture that survived and brought it forward, which means there's God truth in the middle of it. So regardless of that, I tend to be one who believes this story actually happened. You might not be there, and that's okay, all right? But to me, this is a story that speaks to something deep inside of us. It speaks to something that God knew about you and how you're wired and how I'm wired as a human being. And I want us to kind of dig into it from that perspective. So I'm going to probably destroy your VeggieTales version of this story. I'm probably going to make you it's more of a tragedy, really. When you watch it with the cucumbers and stuff in it, it's kind of happy, but this is more of a tragedy. This is not one of those stories where, it's supposed to have a happy ending. That's not really the point. But I want you to hear kind of this story from maybe a fresh perspective and fresh eyes. So here we go. Here's the opening verse of Jonah chapter 1. The word of the Lord, and Lord is capitalized because this is Yahweh. Okay, so this is the Hebrew name for God, the I am, Yahweh. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Right off the bat, something we miss in our American eyes. This is hilarious. Jonah's name means dove. So Jonah means dove, and his family name, Amittai, means family of faithfulness. Okay? So when you're reading this and you're reading in the original language, this is the word of the Lord came to this guy who's the representative of innocence and peace, and his family is completely faithful. And the rest of the story, if you know it, sounds nothing like that at all, right? That this is a story of a guy who in a moment was asked to be faithful and moved in the opposite direction almost immediately. And I don't know, that's the last nerd nugget you get today. Sorry. Anyway, so here's what the word of the Lord told Jonah to do. In verse 2 it says this: Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. So the city of Nineveh, God has just seen its wickedness, and God has seen that there's bad stuff happening there, and He's sending Jonah as a prophet to go to Nineveh and preach against it, to share His word, to share God's truth with the people that are there, because its wickedness has come up before me. But here's what Jonah actually decided to do. It says this: But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. Now, one more thing really quick. So when I grew up, I was told that this means Tarsus, which is the same way that same place the Apostle Paul was from. It's actually not that. It literally says Tarshish. And in VeggieTales, they say Tarsus too. Sorry, I'm offending you already, but it's Tarshish. Tarshish is an actual place. It was a place on the coast of Spain. We're going to explain a little bit more about it in a minute. But it's hilarious that this is the place that he wanted to go. So hold that thought, and we'll come back to it in just a second. So here's what Jonah had to do. He had to go down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port, and after paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Now, maybe, just maybe, at this point, you're reading the story and you think, well, perhaps Jonah just might have made a little bit of a mistake, right? He was told to go across the street, and he went 3 blocks in the opposite direction on accident. Or, he just kind of subtly took a wrong turn, or his GPS didn't lead him in the right direction. That's not what's happening here at all. I want to show you in this. This is a map of the Mediterranean Sea, okay? So just get your bearings. Here's Israel over here. Here's the coast of Spain. The boot. You see Italy, northern Africa, all that stuff. Okay, now, so it says in this story that he went down to Joppa, right? He went down to Joppa, and from Joppa, which was one of the ports, he had 2 options, okay? He was supposed to go north about 500 miles to the city of Nineveh, which is in modern day, the mountains of northern Iraq. The northern mountains of Iraq is where Nineveh is. But instead of doing that, he goes 2,500 miles across the Mediterranean Sea to Tarshish. This was not an accident, okay? This was not a wrong turn. Jonah made a decision to go, okay, God wants me to go to Nineveh. I ain't about that. I'm going over here. And here's some interesting things about this. There's a couple of things in the story that you don't know because you don't think about this thing. You see, the whole point, perhaps, right? We characterize Jonah as this guy who had no faith, or this guy who was just avoiding God's will in his life. But the truth is, this was really complicated. Nineveh was actually the capital of the Assyrian Empire at the time. And the Assyrians, they ruled all the things, okay? And so that was like the centerpiece of this empire that was actually persecuting Jonah's people. And in fact, the king, you can read about this in 2 Kings, the king of the Assyrian Empire at the time would constantly raid Israel. And he would deport their people, and he would steal all their goods and just raid and pillage like pirates all the time. And so Jonah, when he gets this word of the Lord to go to Nineveh, half his friends would have probably thought he was being a patriot, right? So wait. So you're saying God told you to go to Nineveh, but if you don't, he's going to destroy the place. What if you just don't go, right? And so there was some of that was going on. But from a completely practical perspective, okay, if you just humanize the story, if you had the choice to go 150 miles into the northern mountains of Iraq, or go hang out on the beaches of the coast of Spain, which one do you pick, right? And so he makes this decision to get in a boat and move 2,500 miles into the opposite direction of where God wanted him to go. And the story continues like this. Remember, so he went down to Joppa. I want you to notice some of this stuff that he goes, all this kind of downward spiral stuff. This sets up a pattern that all of us can actually see in our own behavior. So he went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, which is kind of a cost for him, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Now, I want you to notice a couple things in this word before we go any further. All of this stuff, all of these words in the original language have this kind of image of down. So he went down. Joppa's literally south. Paying the cost means that his money went down. And aboard, the word that's used for aboard in here in the original language means he literally descended into the bottom of the ship. He descended into the bottom of the ship. And then he sailed for Tarshish, which is the opposite direction of where God told him to go. Now, if you grew up in Sunday school, you know what happens next. It says this: Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. I love that it's personified. It's like the ship's going, don't make me come down there, okay? This is bad. And if you don't stop sailing me this way, I'm just going to explode, and we're all going to drown out in the middle of the sea. This horrible storm, this horrible mess has come upon the ship. And so all of a sudden, because of Jonah's decision, the sailors and everyone else that's on that boat, they find themselves caught up in a storm that is not of their own creation. And Jonah was kind of the epicenter of the mess that they all find themselves in, which is really important for where we're going to go in a minute, but they didn't create it. They just kind of became characters in the story. Listen to what they do. All the sailors were afraid, and each of them cried out to their own God. They were pagans, okay, so they were Greeks more than likely, and they're crying out to all their idols and all their pantheon of all their gods. They're crying out to all of them, and nothing's working. So then they're so desperate, they throw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. They just throw everything overboard, throw it all over. Maybe this will make it easier for us. But Jonah, listen to what Jonah was doing in the middle of this. But Jonah had gone below deck. There he goes down again, where he laid down, and fell into a deep sleep. So there's this crazy storm brewing. And the sailors are literally losing their minds, and they're screaming to their gods on the top deck, and they're tossing the cargo overboard. And somehow, Jonah is in the bottom of the boat asleep. He's in this deep sleep, laying down in the bottom of the boat. So I want you to pick up on all this downward language here for a minute. So look at this for a minute. So you've got Joppa, where he went down, and then he went down aboard the ship, and then he went below deck, and then he laid down, and he found himself in a deep sleep. He is in a downward spiral. And honestly, this is kind of metaphorical for a pattern of behavior that we all find ourselves in sometimes. We make this decision, right? So Joppa really was this kind of like, if you go to the next slide for me, please, and then maybe one more. Joppa was the decision to kind of defy what God would have them do. Joppa was a decision of defiance. It was a decision that said, I know there's something I should do, but it's not what I want to do. I'm going to move in a new direction. And so then going aboard was kind of like, I'm going to try my own way. I'm going to do things my way. I've decided that I'm going to try this because I know what I could do and what I should do, but that's not what I want. And then when the storm came, right, so then it happens. The calamity happens. The mistake has occurred. Then he's trying to hide. He's trying to hide from this mistake that he's made. And again, if you've been there where you're like, okay, this storm is now here in my life. This storm has now occurred, and I'm just going to pretend like it didn't happen, right? And then when you laying down is this survival mode. I don't know if you've ever been in one of those moments where you just want to curl up in a blanket and stare at Netflix uncontrollably until you get that little warning, like, are you still here? Are you still alive? But that's kind of where he finds himself. He just wants to lay down and curl up and wrap a blanket over his head, and the storm is so severe at this point that he doesn't know how he's going to get out of it, okay? The spiral is in full effect. And then this deep sleep kind of represents our phase of denial, This is the part where the captain's going to come and enter into the story in just a second, and when he does, Jonah's kind of like, well, what's going on? Oh, what are you talking about? Everything seems to be fine to me. And how many times do we find ourselves there, We make a decision, and we realize shortly after making that decision that it's not taking us where we want to go. Or maybe it's not even something that was of our own volition. Maybe we're just characters who are caught up in the storm of someone else, but all of a sudden this storm kind of exists. This problem, this catastrophe is kind of there, and it feels like our very life is threatening to just collapse underneath of us. And this downward spiral of defiance and trying something and hiding from it and then trying to just be in complete survival mode and then denying that it even exists, that's kind of where we start going down towards the drain, right? I mean, this is a pattern of behavior that's really common. It's not something that's unnoticeable. All of us have kind of been here and have been a part of this. So listen to how the story continues. Keep this in your mind. Here's what happens. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Dude, do you see what's going on? How could you be asleep right now? The whole ship is going to be torn apart, and you're down here. We're all like screaming to our gods, and we're trying to, we tossed all our money over the side, and dude, you're down here asleep. Help us. Well, you're not behaving the right way. Something's not right." And he starts to generate all these questions. And he says, "Hey, get up, call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish. Get up and look up," right? Wake up and look up. Get up from this sleep that you're in and look up. Maybe God has got something for you. Maybe God is trying to tell you something. Jonah knew that was the answer. Jonah knew that was probably what was going on. But at this point, he's kind of not ready to admit everything. And so he's still hiding. He's still hiding. He's denying what it is that's actually happening at this point. So the captain, obviously the story continues because the captain can't really get anything out of Jonah, and Jonah won't cry out to his Lord or anything like that. So it says that the sailors, they come together and they say, "Listen, let's cast lots." This is like, the best way for me to explain this to you is like the modern day equivalent of drawing straws. So like they draw straws and to see who's going to be it. And it turns out that falls on Jonah. So it says they cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity. And when they do, they cast the lots, and the lots fall on Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What did you do, Jonah? What did you do?" And then they have all the rest of these questions. They say, "What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you?" They just have all these kind of piercing, want to know more types of questions. Now, Jonah knows that he's caught. And this is a really big key. This is important. So at this point, he's been in denial, he's been hiding, he's been in full survival mode, but at this, he comes to the conclusion that they all know what's going on. And instead of lying again, or instead of denying again, or instead of, trying to cover it up or come up with another, illustration to prove that they're wrong, he just opens up. He just owns up to what's going on. And he says this, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven who made the sea and the dry land." I love this because the guys, it says they're terrified in the very next verse, because think about this for a minute. They're like, "Okay, Jonah, hold on. Let me just get this straight. So you are a prophet whose God created the land and the sea, and you ran away from him in a boat, and you brought us? What were you, dude, what are you thinking?" Right? And so there's this really terrified moment, okay, you're telling me you didn't see this, okay, and you brought us along for the ride in this mess. So they're terrified, and they asked, "What have you done?" They knew he was running from the Lord because he had already told them so. So this whole cat's out of the bag now. The whole thing is kind of laying out. And so during this whole mess, it says the sea is getting rougher and rougher and rougher. So they asked him, what should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us? And so this is where the story kind of takes a really hard turn. If you watch the VeggieTales version, there's the next piece kind of comes off Shakespearean, like Jonah's trying to be a hero. Because this is what it says, right? And I don't want to embarrass myself doing this, but we read it like this, like, oh, just pick me up and throw me into the sea, and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that a great storm has come upon you. I will be your sacrificial lamb. I will take care of it. That's the way we read it. But that's not actually what's happening at all. There's nothing heroic in Jonah saying this. We read this and we think that this is Jonah being like suddenly becoming faithful. That's not what's happening at all. It's better than that. It's far richer and I honestly think far sadder. What he's actually saying is, back up for me, I don't know if I want to fight this mess anymore. And I don't see an answer. I don't see a solution to this, so maybe I shouldn't fight anymore. Maybe you should just throw me overboard. You know, maybe the weight of this and this storm just seems far too complicated. This mess that I've created for myself just seems far too hard, and I just don't know if I want to fight it anymore. And I want to pause for a minute, because the thing is, if you find yourself in one of these storms, if you're here this morning or listening to the sound of my voice or watching this video or whatever, and you find yourself in the middle of a storm, you feel this. And that's not lost on me. Okay, it's not lost on me that you get to a place where you're like, I just don't know if I can fight this anymore. I don't know if I can carry this weight anymore. You may be the only person in the world that knows what it is you're going through. You may be the only person in the world that knows the weight that you're carrying on your shoulders. And I just want you to know that's not lost on me. In fact, I think you're in the perfect place. In fact, we prayed that you'd be here today. We as leaders and the staff, we literally sat down and we prayed that you would be here today. I don't think it's any accident at all that you've come to be a part of what's happening in this place today. I think it is due to God's kindness and God's providence and God's love and God's grace for you that you've been here to hear this story, because I think, and if I might be so bold, I don't like speaking for God. I'm not a prophet, but I just feel like God has an answer for you. And the answer for you is going to come out of His grace. It's going to come out of His love. It's going to come out of His hope. And that answer is that you don't have to be alone in the middle of this. That there are actually people who want to be a part of this story with you, that want to be a part of the solution with you, that wants to walk with you through this whole thing. In fact, it's in the story. The story continues like this. See, the sailors, they could have picked him up and thrown him overboard, but it says, instead the men did their best to row back to dry lands, right? They were doing their best to fight the storm. Jonah said, just throw me over. And like, we're not going to do that. And so, but the problem was that they got too big. The storm got too great, for the sea grew even wilder than before in the middle of this. And so then they cried out. This is huge. They cried out to the Lord, please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Lord, have done as you please. I love this picture, if I just could have paused for a minute. These polytheistic pagan sailors just prayed for the first time to God because a prophet was trying to run away from God's will to tell people about God's graciousness. Like I just don't want you to miss that, okay? There's a million lessons in this, and in fact, the staff pointed out, Jamie pointed one out to me when we previewed this that I just didn't picture. You know, most of the time when we see a Christian screw up in society today, our first reaction is to point a finger, right? This is a prophet. This is a person who knew God better than anybody else, and he screwed up. He messed up. He moved in the direction he wasn't supposed to go. But their first reaction was to kneel down and pray and glorify God, and I just love that. I think there's a lesson in there somewhere, not for this message because I don't have time, but don't miss that, all right? So here's what they do. Then they took Jonah and they threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. And at this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. They threw all their idols down, and they realized that God is God, right? And in the middle of Jonah trying not to share God's will, for the best of his ability, he ended up doing it anyway with a group of guys on a boat. But see, here's the thing. This whole story, to put it back to kind of where we find ourselves, this whole story, the whole point of this is that we find ourselves sometimes in a spiral so far down that it seems every decision we make just makes it worse. You know, look at these words again. We defy, right? We either defy God's will for our life, or we make a decision that we knew we shouldn't have, just based on our consciousness or our best efforts or whatever, and then all of a sudden we realize, well, that didn't quite work. I'm going to try something different. And then when the storm gets worse, we begin hiding right? And you find yourself having to cover up behavior or to pretend like it didn't happen. Or you got to keep a secret from your spouse. You got to keep a secret from your boss. You got to keep a secret from your kids. People can't know about this. Your friends can't know the whole thing. And then all of a sudden you're in survival mode because the web of lies is getting really complicated, and you got to cover it up, or you got to try to keep it going. And then finally you find yourself just in complete denial. You're like, the only thing that I can do is say, no, you're wrong, you're crazy. That's just not what's going on. All this is a downward spiral. It's all a downward movement in our lives. So what do we do to go back up? What is it that we can do to go back up? Well, I think the truth of this is actually found in what the sailors just did. There were three things that they did that happened in the middle of this story that obviously point out what I think we can do in our own pattern of behavior. And it goes like this. The first thing we got to do is wake up. They went to Jonah and they're like, stop sleeping. How could you be sleeping? How could you be asleep when this whole mess has come upon us? Wake up. And the next thing they do is they say, look up, turn to God. Maybe you should talk to your God. Maybe God's got something for you. This is that pattern for us where we go, hey, you know what, God, I don't know what's going on, but I don't have the answer, and you do. So I'm going to cry out to you because I don't know what to do next. And then the last one is you got to own up. Jonah finally fessed up, and he said, here's what I did. And you got to own up. You got to tell somebody. You got to tell somebody what's going on in your life. See, again, I don't want, this is not lost on me that there's some of you in this room this morning that you got this thing. And I don't know what it is. It could be in your finances. It could be in your marriage. It could be in your job. It could be a substance abuse thing. It could be a pattern of negative behavior that you just can't seem to get out of, but you just can't get out of it. And you've tried. You've tried and you've tried. You've tried everything you can think of on your own, but the storm just keeps getting worse. And you got to tell somebody. That's really step one. About 7 years ago, I was leading an Emmaus walk. If you don't know what Emmaus walk is, it's just like a 3-day weekend retreat for people to come, and it's based on the story from Luke, and just to give space for people to have a deep kind of experience with God. It's a spiritual retreat. It's not, you don't actually walk to Emmaus. Okay, it's just a weekend. But it was in this really the place in Kentucky where we got to go was this like old nun convent that looked like a Gothic castle. It was super creepy. And so I was in the chapel at night. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and I was the only one that was in there. And I was praying, and it was super quiet. You ever been in one of those spaces where it just feels like it robs the sound, and you can hear quiet in a way you never could? It was like that. And all of a sudden, I realized that someone has sat down beside me, and it startled them. I mean, I was shocked. Like, I gave me like a jump start. And I look over, and I didn't know who he was, but it was just a guy that was a part of the retreat. And he begins opening up, and he goes, I'm in a mess, and my marriage is falling apart, and part of it's my fault, and part of it's her fault, but I've been sleeping on the couch for like 7 months, and I've started abusing alcohol, and I can't stop. I can't make this stop. I can't make my marriage better. I can't make the drinking stop. I can't make my anger and my bitterness go away, and I just don't know what to do, and there's no one else on the planet that knows. This is what he said to me. He said, there's no one on earth that knows. Everyone who looks at us thinks our marriage is perfect. Everyone that looks at me, they think that I've got it all together. And if I said anything to anybody, my whole reputation is going to come crashing down, and I'll ruin my wife's reputation, and I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. It's literally, that's how he began the conversation. And so then in me, it generated this series of questions, kind of like in the story. And we sat for like 3 hours in this super creepy chapel, and I just asked him questions. And I asked him to tell me more about how they got there and what was going on. And this started a conversation that actually led to counseling for him first, and then for his wife second, and then for them both together. And some of it was with one of the pastors that I knew, and some of it was with a professional, and some of it was about substance abuse and all of the things that were going on in that capacity. And it took about a year, before they got to where they could even be in the same room together again. And nobody knew. You look at this couple, and they were just like perfect on the outside, but at home, everything was crumbling, and nobody knew. But from a pattern of just sitting down next to a random stranger in a chapel and sharing, look, this is what is going on in my life, and I've got to own it, and I've got to say that this is it, and I don't know where to go. And then choosing to look up, choosing to go, God, you've got to have an answer for me. I don't know what it is, but there's got to be something. And then choosing to own up and be a part of a process that changed. This man's life is completely different. His marriage is completely restored. He's got kids. He's on his way to having grandkids, an entire family. I'm convinced, there are children that would not exist today if he hadn't sat there in that moment and said, you know what, this is not right, and I'm caught in a spiral, and I don't know how to make it stop. And so that's why, if you're sitting in this room today, and you're listening to everything that I've been saying, you're like, this is me, and I'm caught in the spiral, and I don't know where to go, and I don't know what to do, like, I just want to give you an opportunity to tell someone, right? So here's what we've done. In just a minute, I'm going to pray, and this is it. The service is over. The band is going to play that wake-up song again behind me, but it's not for you all to sing. You're dismissed as soon as I get done praying. But I want to throw a QR code on the screen, and what I want to invite you to do is either scan this QR code or go to tcat.church/turnaround, and you just provide a little bit of information, your name, and what kind of turnaround you need in your life. And we've got a team of people who've committed to pray just for you for the next 7 days, to look up with you, so that there's another human being in this world that knows what's going on in you. Now, some of you all, the answer for you is to pull out your phone right now and text a friend, because you've got that person that you need to tell that will walk alongside you in this mess. But some of you don't have that. Some of you are scared to death to tell anybody anything. And so I want to give you this chance. There's a team of people who are going to pray specifically for you for the next 7 days, that God would turn around what's going on in your life. The last layer of this that we've created for you is on your way out the door, there's going to be a group of individuals lined up against the back wall. Now, if you just need somebody to pray with you right now, those 4 or 5 people that are there, they would love to pray with you with no judging eyes and no judging ears. They just want God to turn your life around. Now, let me just say, for those of you that are on the fence about faith, Jesus is the answer to the questions you've been asking. Jesus is the answer to the transformation you've been looking for, and they want to walk with you. And they want to be that person that can shoulder this burden with you. You're not alone.